everyone. Hello. Oh, thank you for all the hellos. Welcome to Spring Lobby Weekend 2024. Thank you all so much for being here. If you've been here before, this is going to sound repetitive, but I just need to thank everyone here before we really get started. Every year, the amount of work that the people in the audience do to get here, we're obviously doing a lot to make sure that the programming runs smoothly, that you're all fed and all that good stuff. You're learning what you need to learn, but you all are really booking flights, making calls, getting your friends to be here, making new friends and convincing them to come here for the first time. So it is an incredible amount of work that has gone in by all 300 plus of us to be here. So just a huge round of applause for everyone in this room. And before we really get started introducing who we are, if we haven't spoken to you already, I do want to welcome everyone just a little more intentionally in a way that also hopefully will set the tone for what kind of space we want to have in this room, in all the rooms while we're here during this event. So this is called the Big Welcome, a variation of it. So we welcome you here. We welcome your excitement and your trepidation, your clear inquiries and your big question marks. We welcome your wide eyes and open hearts right alongside your side eyes and skepticism. We welcome you here. With your culture, your ethnic origin, your race, accent, and all of the complexities that make up your cultural identity. We honor your histories, and we honor the experiences of your ancestors, and we welcome them here too. We welcome your spiritual practice, your religious affiliation, your spiritual walk. However you hold that aspect of your life is welcomed here. We welcome your love, how you love, who you love, and your understanding of what love is. We welcome you here. We welcome your questions, your privilege, your grief, your guilt, your shame. We welcome your pride, your resilience, your consciousness, your spirit. We celebrate your sovereignty and liberation because, as Aboriginal activists from Queensland said, yours is bound up with mine. So join me this weekend through Tuesday in celebrating us, in experiencing discomfort, thinking radically, digging deep, and rising up, rooting down, and dreaming big. We welcome you to grow, to explore while you're here. We welcome you here. So thanks, everyone. So with that said, many of you know who FCNL is, not who, but what. This is our nonprofit Quaker organization. We lobby for many different things in the public interest. We are the Friends Committee on National Legislation. And so that's what you all are going to be doing with us. We're going to learn a lot about how to lobby. How do you engage with your members of Congress? What is lobbying? And how can we do it? I'm sure there's lots of opinions about what lobbying is and what it can be. And so hopefully people will explore that this weekend with us, especially when we lobby on Tuesday. And FCNL has a very special way of lobbying. It's very much based in relational conversations, understanding each other's values, and listening. We're going to learn so much more about that throughout the weekend, but just previewing a little bit more about how we're going to engage this weekend. So I'll introduce myself now. My name is Larissa Gil Sanhueza. I use she, her pronouns. I am director of the Young Adult Program, and I'm also an alum of the Young Adult Program. I did complete one of the programs, I think 5 years ago now, and just loved it so much that I took the opportunity to keep working at FCNL and obviously getting to meet just such amazing people like this person right here, and a lot of you, all of you right now in the audience. So I'll let my colleague introduce herself now, and we'll also get to hear a little bit about who's in the room.
Okay, hola, good afternoon. My name is Giselle Lopez Estrada, and I serve as FCNL's Young Adult Program Associate. I am responsible for many things at FCNL, but my favorite and most rewarding part of my job is this event. Spring Lobby Weekend is more than just 4 days. For me, Spring Lobby Weekend started in October when I reached out to our network and recruited over 26 leaders in over 15 states to organize their community and come to our nation's capital to lobby in support of the enactment of a Truth and Healing Commission. Whoa, there's so many familiar faces, it's making me so happy. So many of y'all might not know this, but 6 years ago, as a college freshman, I was you. I was an attendee at Spring Lobby Weekend. At the time, I didn't know what lobbying or advocacy was, but having the opportunity to learn and practice my newly gained skills not only empowered me to advocate for myself and my community, but also inspired me to expose my community members to this experience. Since my first exposure, I have led my own delegations from Texas. Shout out to the Texas people in the crowd. And as a volunteer, and now as a staff member, I continue to help guide and organize our network through the Delegation Leader Program. Can my delegation leader stand up, or anyone else who organized a group, please stand up? Come on. Woo! Yes, yes. Thank you. Okay, so without everyone who stood up, this event would not be possible. So again, I just want to thank y'all so much for all y'all's hard work. We're here now. We did it. Okay, so now we're gonna call on some people. I'm gonna point to you, and someone will come with a mic, and I want you to say your name, where you're coming from, and why you are here. So do we have any volunteers? Any brave people? Oh, you. Okay.
Hey, how y'all doing? My name is Lucky. I am from Charlotte, North Carolina. Woo woo. And I'm really here to support my best friend, Avella. This is new to me, but anything that she does, I'm happy to support.
Very sweet. Okay, I see someone else. Can we get a mic to, yes.
How y'all doing? Good. My name is Charles Allen. I am from the great state of Michigan, the freshwater capital of the United States. And I am here because I believe that the people united will never be defeated. So I'm here and I represent Michigan United in Michigan, and I'm so happy to be lobbying again. This is our second year with y'all. Thank y'all for doing this. Yes.
That's amazing. Can I get another brave person? Okay, you. Sorry for calling you. I'll get to know your name hopefully soon.
Hello, everyone. My name is Karen Guadalupe Arroyo. I am from California, and and I am here because my very awesome high school friend, Joanna Valdez Castro, she invited me here, and she promised me on her last semester at Cal State San Marcos that she was going to bring me, and I was like, don't make me that big of a promise, and look where I'm at now. So thank you.
That's amazing. And can I just get one more person? Okay. Yes.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Joma Tamang, and I am a new organizer in New Hampshire. And I met Fisto recently, and he was like, hey, come to this really cool thing, and you're going to be able to learn a lot of things and talk to a lot of people. And I was like, okay, I'm coming. And this is my 4th time seeing him, and it's been amazing. And I'm really excited to get to know everyone and learn more things. Thank you.
All right, thanks everyone. I just want to highlight, I love all the personal shout outs because I mean, that's, I think, a true testament of why this is such a huge success every year. This is organizing at its finest. You bring people in by maybe just being their friend and telling them that this is a cool trip. Maybe they're really interested in the topic. It doesn't quite matter how someone gets here. It's about what you experience when you're here. The fact that someone got you here, convinced you that this was going to be a good use of your time, that you were going to learn something. So I just want to thank everyone for the organizing that you do, in addition to the lobbying that's happening on Tuesday. So not to be a broken record, but just like one last round of applause for everyone. That's it, I promise. Okay, so now we do have a lot of little things to go over, a lot of important things to go over. So let me just get my notes out. First of all, in case you do not know exactly what we're lobbying on here, we are partnering with the Native American Advocacy Program at FCNL, again, Friends Committee on National Legislation. We work on a variety of issues. There's a lot. But this event, we are partnering with the lobbyists that are really focused on Native issues at FCNL, and in particular, passing the Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. And yeah, there we go. So you're gonna learn a lot more about what that does, what were the Indian boarding schools, like I mentioned earlier. But as we move through this weekend, advocating in allyship with Native communities, it is especially important to remember the land we are on and what that means for the work that we need to do. So we're gonna read through the land acknowledgement now, but besides just the acknowledgement of what land we're on, we know that context is important. So I'm going to read this preamble first, then I will read the land acknowledgement itself, and we'll just take a couple moments to sit with it and let that sink in. So we are sharing this land acknowledgement as an important step towards truth-telling. We place this land acknowledgement in the present. Colonialism is a current, ongoing process and mindset, and we commit to working to build our awareness and interruption of our present participation in it. We strive to root these truths in action as a step towards right relationship with the indigenous people of this land. We recognize the harms of colonization on this stolen land, known as Turtle Island, to many of the indigenous tribes of the area. We honor and recognize the resilience of the Native American peoples who still live across this land, many of which were forced to move during the early stages of colonization in what is now called the United States of America. So out of the hundreds of Indian boarding schools for Native American children that we'll be discussing, beginning in 1796 through the 1960s, Quakers founded and operated at least 30 day and boarding schools on indigenous nations' lands in collaboration with the US government. Indian boarding schools during the founding of this country were often run in partnership with religious organizations, such as Friends, Quakers, and attempted to culturally destroy Native American people. Quakers have amends to make for our part in this, and we as a Quaker organization have a unique part to play in reconciling the damage these schools committed to Native American people that still lives on today. That damage still lives on today. We also acknowledge how the profits and resources that we have today as an organization stem from the founding of our nation through broken treaties, stolen land, and genocidal acts against Native Americans. As such, we pledge to continue to put our organization's resources to pushing for equity and right relationship with Native Americans through collaborating with Native American organizations, some of which you'll hear from, many of which you'll hear from this weekend, to lobby Congress and the administration for investments in Indian country, policy changes to benefit Native American communities, and respect for tribal sovereignty. So this is the acknowledgement itself, and like I said, we will take a couple moments just to let all of that sink in. It's really important, always, and especially now because we are working in allyship with Native communities on this advocacy that we're doing. So FCNL recognizes and honors the Nacotchtank tribe on whose ancestral land our buildings now stand. They are also known as the Anacostans, who lived along the banks of the Anacostia River, including in several villages on Capitol Hill and what is now Washington, D.C. By the 1700s, the Nacotchtank tribe had merged with other tribes, like the Pamunkey and the Piscataway, who still exist today. Thank you, everyone. So at this event, I mentioned we will be hearing from a lot of expert speakers. We are fortunate to have a lot of support and expertise, not just in the policy that we're working on, but also in the care that it takes to sustain a movement. I'm sure I don't have to tell all of you that. I'm happy to share for that reason that we do have 3 designated listeners at the event this year. So this is not new to our event, but we have more designated listeners this year. And you know, one of the reasons for this is that we will be hearing some heavy stories. We're going to be learning about traumatic policies. And we are also a diverse group of people that comes from many different parts of the country and many different lived experiences. Designated listeners are meant specifically to process/hold anything that does come up for the audience as we move through the weekend. So I'm going to introduce our designated listeners so you all know who they are. I'll ask them to come up on the stage. I don't know where they went, actually. Oh, there they are. Thank you. So if you can just come up so people can see who you are, maybe stand right by your pictures. I think that's probably fine. Okay, great. So I'll introduce them quickly, and then Linnea will join us just to give a little more information about what they're doing. So Lauren, if you can wave, and Linnea, if you can wave. They lead FCNL's work, they are FCNL staff, around anti-racism, anti-bias, justice, equity, diversity, inclusion, and they serve as resources and listeners for FCNL staff, so they will also be listening, and you can come talk to them during this event. And then we are very grateful to have join us Tony. If you want to wave your hand, thank you. So Tony is a member of the Lumbee tribe of North Carolina, with Tuscarora heritage, and he has dedicated over 20 years to conducting talking circles in tribal communities across North Carolina and Turtle Island. In his various roles, including his current position, congrats, as a third-year PhD student in public health, he respects and honors, yeah, there we go. It's a big deal. He respects and honors the Indigenous principles of responsibility, relationship, reciprocity, and redistribution, which do guide his work and academic pursuits. So thank you, Tony. And Linnea, I'll have you come up so you can just give a little more explanation of what the three of y'all are doing for us.
Hello, everyone. It's an honor to be a designated listener for you all. And I can say the same, I think, for Tony and Lauren. So basically, what we as designated listeners are here to do, since it may be an unfamiliar role to you all, is basically to be available, present, and supportive to any of you and all of you as you want to carry, if you are carrying weight around any heavy or painful information or potentially harmful interactions, whether you personally experienced it or you witnessed it. We believe we are all worthy of support, and we may need someone just to talk to connect with around anything that may be feeling heavy. And so that's really what we're here to do. There's nothing that is too small, too big for us to try and help hold with you if that is something that you feel like you would like to do. We can offer support by our presence, listening, advocating with or for you, processing and discussing next steps to address the concerns that you brought up as needed. We will also be at the lunch caucus spaces starting tomorrow and Monday. And so one of us will be in those spaces for a touchstone as well. And you can reach any of us in person or via cell phone. You can text us, call us, and our information is kind of hung up around this space and will be, well, I guess was on the slides. But yeah, please, we're around. We're going to be kind of sitting near the doors during main events. So if you just want to tap us to talk, we'll be kind of near the doors for you to do that. Thank you.
Thank you all. And that actually does transition us well into the last thing Linnea said. So she mentioned caucus groups. So that's another opportunity that we'll have throughout this event to meet with each other in a different way. So what do we mean? What do we mean by caucus groups? You can also think of this as affinity groups, which you might have heard more often what an affinity group is. So at registration, there will be an opportunity to sign up for these caucus groups. When you are just maneuvering through the event and then later on you go back to registration, you pass the table, you'll see not only a page that shows who the designated listeners are, but you'll also see an opportunity to sign up to attend one of the caucus groups. And if you'd like to help lead it, that would be amazing. We have all the support you need to lead it. You don't have to really do much except just be the one that's like helping the conversation move along. But let me explain what we mean by this. So the word caucus comes from an Algonquin word meaning counselor. A caucus is a group of people who share a certain mindset or similar concerns, similar identity, and gather to share a council together. Caucuses provide spaces for people to work within their own racial/ethnic groups, for example. So for people of color that are attending this event, a caucus can be a place to simply connect, play, find joy, to work with peers to address the impact of racism, to interrupt experiences of internalized racism, and to create a space for healing and working for individual/collective liberation. At times, people of color may also wish to break into more specific caucuses, sometimes based on experiences with a particular issue, for example. For those of us that are not people of color, for white audience members, a caucus can provide time and space to work explicitly and intentionally on understanding and interrupting white culture and white privilege, and to practice other ways of being. A white caucus puts the onus on the white person to teach each other about these ideas, rather than placing a burden on people of color to teach them. So I don't think these ideas are new by any means. I have been in many spaces with affinity groups like this, and so I don't think this will be different from many of y'all's experiences with affinity groups. But if you're interested in meeting as a group, as a caucus group, as an affinity group, especially based on, like I said, if you do identify as BIPOC, or some other identity that you really do want to make sure that you're processing with people at this event. You want to meet other people that share that part of you. I think we want, and I know that we want to make that space for everyone. So you can go sign up for these rooms. Not mandatory, but highly encouraged for you to take the opportunity to meet other people that way. Again, I'll just repeat one last time. It is at registration, and they will be meeting during lunch. So during lunch, you can have your own normal lunch with your group. You can also join a caucus group and have lunch as a caucus group. Lunch brings me to a very important topic of where do we eat during meal times? So everyone has a program, correct? Can everyone get the program out? And if you can go to page 11, that would be great. So page 11 is a map, and you'll notice that lots of the rooms that we have used, like we're using for workshops and things like that, those are all there. So hopefully this map helps people. We are technically on 2 different floors with this event, although the majority of stuff is happening in this room or in the rooms over behind that wall over there. I want to point out where you see the fork and spoon crossing. That means that during meal times, there will be food there. So in the Crystal Ballroom, there is food and you can sit there to eat. If you go downstairs to the lobby level, we're currently on plaza level. Downstairs is lobby level. You'll notice other symbols. You can eat there too. So obviously we started today with registration, and this is the first thing we're talking about. So tomorrow and Monday, make sure that you are either going to the Crystal Ballroom, where there will be, food set up, or if you want to grab food and then eat in one of these lower rooms, Richmond, Roanoke, Williamsburg, Yorktown. And the reason for that is because the caucus groups will be meeting in Washington's 1, 2, and 3. So everywhere that you see the fork and spoon means you should have lunch there if you do not want to be part of a caucus group. But if you do want to be part of one of those groups and you've signed up and gotten that information, then you will be eating in Washington's 1, 2, and 3. So just wanted to point that out. Another thing related to meal times, we are currently in the season of Ramadan, and there are many who may be observing or fasting during this time. There is a little pile of to-go containers. So if you are someone that needs to take food to potentially eat later if you want, if you are fasting, please take advantage of those to-go containers. We want to make sure that you still are getting this food that we're providing, and then you can eat when appropriate. If you are not observing Ramadan, if you are not fasting, please do not use the to-go containers. We really want to respect the hotel's policies, and also just make sure there's enough for those who really do need to take their food and potentially eat it later. So just pointing that out, there will be a sign next to the to-go boxes as well. All right, so we're almost done with all of this announcement stuff, and we will get a little deeper into, why we're here and actually start hearing from some panelists. But some final things that I do want to talk about. First of all, in the very back room, if you're still looking at the map, the Monroe rooms are quiet spaces. So if you are someone that needs to pray, if you are someone that needs silent space to process, as long as you are silent in that room, that is a multi-purpose room. We want to make sure that people have a silent space to go for whatever they need. Those are the Monroe rooms. And if I'm not mistaken, there will be signs that make it very clear, like this is the quiet space. So no talking in there, no eating in there. Monroe rooms are quiet space only. Thank you to everyone who put on a mask as you were coming in. We are not masking everywhere. When you're eating, obviously you cannot be wearing a mask. But in this ballroom, unless you're speaking on the stage, we do want to respect that there are still concerns around COVID-19, around getting sick in general. So wearing a mask in this ballroom will be really important. This is when all of us are in one room sitting together, right? So just making sure that we all know that. And then finally, oh my goodness, finally, hopefully this is more exciting. Follow us on social media. So if you can bring out your phone real quick, Instagram, we are at Quaker Lobby. And fun fact, we just launched a TikTok. There is one TikTok in there. There will be more after this weekend, but please, oh, there's now 3 TikToks as of this morning. Okay, great. I checked last night, so that's my bad. At Quaker Lobby as well. TikTok, Instagram, at Quaker Lobby. If you're posting TikToks, if you're posting stories, photos, whatever, tag us, please. I know our social media team in the back will be very, very happy to see all of your posts. So at Quaker Lobby. Thank you all so much. Okay, well, that's it for logistics, for all the details that all of y'all need. And I think to get us back in the mindset of what we're doing here, we're gonna welcome our General Secretary of the Friends Committee on National Legislation, Bridget Moix. She is going to give us some remarks on why it is so important that we're here, that we're working on the Truth in Healing bill, especially as a Quaker organization. So please welcome Bridget Moix to the stage.
All right, can you hear me? Can you hear me? Yes? Yes? Thumbs up? Okay, good. There, it sounds better. Welcome. I can't say that enough. We are so glad that you are here with us. This is one of the most exciting times of the year for us, and it's wonderful to have you with us. My name's Bridget Moix, and as Larissa said, I'm the General Secretary of FCNL. That is Quaker speak for the head of the organization. But I began my work just like you all, which is learning to lobby with FCNL's young adult program 25 years ago or something. So I'm an alumni as well, an alum of the program, and very proud of that. And I have the honor of working with this incredible staff and community. And I just want to take a minute and make sure that we acknowledge and thank Larissa and Giselle and all, Ernest and everybody. There's many, many people making this happen, but I didn't want to say anything without appreciating all the incredible work that you've done as well. So thank you. So I'm really thrilled that you're all here because, as we like to say at FCNL, change doesn't come from Washington. Change comes to Washington. And that's what you're doing here with us. And your presence, the relationships you're going to build, the lobbying that you're going to do is so important. And this issue, as Larissa said, for us, this issue is very important. It goes to really the heart and soul of acknowledging who we are as a country. For Quakers, acknowledging our role in the founding sins of the country, and doing the work to right relationship and support healing going forward. And that is part of the work of building the promise of the democracy that this country needs, and you are all part of that. Your beautiful, diverse experiences that you're bringing into this room are what make a just, resilient, and inclusive democracy possible, and what make the possibility of a truly beloved community waiting for us, really, waiting for what we can build together. So FCNL has a lot of issues that we work on, as Larissa said, and we have actually 13 different legislative priorities that our governing body has set for us for this Congress, as well as historic issues like advocacy on Native American rights and sovereignty. But this issue, the legislation to establish a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools, it's so important, I believe, because it really embodies some of the most important change work, most challenging change work too, but most important change work that we need to do as a country. It's that work of reckoning with the US's own genocidal history and seeking to right relationship with the indigenous peoples of this land. And for me personally, I really feel committed to working on this bill, this legislation. I believe we can get it passed. I've worked for over 2 decades in the international peace building field, and part of what would happen is we would be studying truth and healing commissions in other countries. We would be studying and trying to say, oh, let's learn from, let's contribute to the work of responding, preventing, and reconciling after genocide, if that is even possible. And people were not even looking at our own country a lot of times in those conversations. And so for me, the work of really reckoning with our own history, that is the work of being able to have any integrity as a country in the world today. So it's very, very important to me personally that we're working on this, and it's really important to our community. The legislation is also deeply significant and important for tribal nations. And we've heard this from our tribal partners. They live with generational trauma and lasting harms from the Indian boarding school era. And you may already know some of this history. It is getting more attention in the media and in policy circles. And I hope that maybe you learn about it now, even in your programs at school. And you're going to learn a lot more this weekend from tribal leaders themselves, advocates and allies, from some of our young adult program advocates who've been working deeply on this issue. And you're going to be hearing directly from the leaders of tribal organizations, as Larissa said, who are really the ones who are leading this work. And FCNL seeks to be in solidarity with them in this advocacy. I want to acknowledge that you might also be carrying painful and traumatic stories yourselves. Some of you are part of tribal communities. Some of you may have connections to this issue that bring up pain and difficulty. And I want to make sure that you take the time in the coming days, whenever you need, to take a breath, to step out, to seek the support from designated listeners and others that you might need. We want to make sure that this is both a safe and a brave space together. So what were Indian boarding schools, if you don't know some of that history? Well, these were not institutions that should be called schools in any way. Rather, they were a systematic tool for cultural genocide inflicted upon Native children, families, communities, by the US government, and in collaboration with various churches and faith communities, including Quakers. The aim of these institutions, which Native children were often forced or coerced into attending, was to strip them of all connection to their culture, traditions, communities, and even family. The schools functioned to forcibly assimilate Native children into white Christian supremacy, ultimately ensuring the fracturing of Native communities and seeking to allow full control of their lands by the United States government. This was the underlying intent. From the early 1800s through the 1960s, The federal government and a number of Christian groups ran over 400 of these Indian boarding schools across Turtle Island, what is now called United States. Of course, cultural genocide was not the stated purpose of these schools, and those who ran them and operated them and worked in them, many of them did believe. They believed they had good intentions. They thought they were doing good in some way, using words like helping to civilize or to save the Native children. But the history that's being uncovered through an extensive study by the Department of the Interior, which is now headed by Secretary Deb Haaland, the first Native American woman to lead a governmental agency, speaks clearly to the atrocities that were inflicted upon children in these institutions. That includes physical, sexual, emotional, and psychological abuse, forced removal from families, lying and coercion of parents, and there have been more than 500 graves found on the grounds of these schools. The conditions at them were horrific, and the justifications unconscionable. One account that has really stuck with me from Paula Palmer, who is a Quaker historian that's been documenting the role of Quakers in these schools. She did an event with us, and she tells the story of a teacher writing in her journal. And Paula has done really, really important work looking into all the historic records that she can find about these schools. And the teacher in this journal is writing about the children, and she says at one point, you know, if they would just stop running away, we could really make progress. If they would just stop running away. It's hard to imagine how the pain and suffering of Native children and families from these schools was continually justified. Today, survivors of Indian boarding schools and their descendants are far more likely to experience depression and PTSD, to struggle with substance abuse disorders, and to live in poverty. It's clear that their well-being, the true well-being of these children and their communities, was not the goal. And society must work to address these wrongs. So FCNL has worked since the 1970s in support of Native American rights and tribal sovereignty. And we have a lot of support across our network for this work. Quakers also have a long history of work with Native Americans and on Native American issues. And you may have read in your history books, often Quakers are cited as having had more peaceful relationships with Native Americans. Yet we also have to face up to our complicity in the Indian boarding school era. We have to face our own role in perpetuating Christian supremacy through these schools and take steps toward apology, truth-telling, and righting of relationships. I'm really glad that many Quaker meetings and churches are opening their records, their archives, and they're looking to understand their own role in this history. And we're humbled and honored that many tribal communities continue to be in relationship with us as we do this. I think there might be some folks from Alaska. Is anyone from Alaska? There's really remarkable work in Alaska by the Quaker Meeting with tribal communities there that I think is pioneering some of this truth and healing work. So thank you for being here. So passing this bill, which is a bipartisan bill and has the opportunity to move this Congress, is important for faith communities, including our own, in doing the work that we need to do to fully face and speak the truth of our complicity in this era. It's important to help us live our faith with integrity. If you know Quakers, you know that integrity is actually one of our core testimonies. Truth-telling, seekers of truth is what Quakers were called in the early days. And that means we need to seek the truth of our own history and to live with integrity in accounting for it. And that's an opportunity for us to live more fully in our faith, to heal ourselves and to contribute to the justice work that we need to do. The Department of Interior's federal investigation on the Indian boarding school era and the Road to Healing listening tour that Deb Holland has been carrying out is monumental work, but it's not the end of the federal government's responsibility. We need this bill. We need to establish a Truth and Healing Commission bill to create the first formal federal commission that will investigate federally funded Indian boarding schools and their history. And this commission will be led by tribal communities and leaders, congressional leaders, and administrative officials. So it would be a truly collaborative commission. It would collect records and provide recommendations then on what are the next steps toward right relationship that Native communities want and need with us. Passing the legislation is about formalizing our commitment as a country to facing our own history, the truth of our own history, and striving in some way to atone for it. This bill is more than a reparation or social justice bill, though. It's about supporting tribal nations, communities, and families in their efforts to heal generations of pain and trauma. It's about identifying the connections between Indian boarding schools and socioeconomic challenges in Native communities today, and developing the policies to address those lasting consequences. And it's about accountability and healing for all of us if we are truly to become a beloved community. For me, this small slice of the history of genocide of Native communities in this country is like a window into broader truth and healing. It's one step where we could begin to acknowledge the broader history of harms and atrocities and injustices in our country in the past and continuing today. And we're very conscious that we're gathering here to work on this part of a past cultural genocide, attempted cultural genocide, I should say, at a time that atrocities continue with the complicity of the United States in Palestine, as well as other places around the world. So we have a lot of work to do, and this is solidarity justice work. The harm that's been inflicted by the Indian boarding school era on Native peoples and families can never be fully repaired. It just can't. But we can commit ourselves to the ongoing work of truth, accountability, and healing that this bill helps us begin. I'm very proud that the FCNL network has lobbied and held community events on this bill, written op-eds, had media appearances. We've written more than 35,000 letters to members of Congress in support of this bill. That's amazing. We need to write more, but it's a good start. And our young adult advocates have been leading the way in this work. They are powerful partners in this movement, like you all will be in the coming days and longer, I hope. So thank you so much for joining us in this work for establishing a Truth and Healing Commission on Indian boarding schools. This work for truth, healing, and justice. We are going to hear from young adult advocates who've been leading the way on this work in a little bit. But first, we want to turn to a clip from PBS about the schools. It's titled Schools Built on Secrets, Understanding Boarding Schools for Native Americans. And it allows us to hear from survivors themselves about this era. I want to note that this video will include difficult information. And again, if you need to pause, breathe, step out, please do what you need to take care of yourself. And we'll just settle into a moment of silence as they pull the video up.
The remains of more than 200 children have been located.
Hundreds of human remains in unmarked graves at 2 Indigenous residential schools in Canada.
Just as it happened in Canada, many Indigenous children here in the United States were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools.
Until now, the devastating and at times fatal history has never been fully investigated.
There was 23 kids that died when my father was at Chamawa boarding school. Some of them were killed running away. It says here, killed by train while running away, gunshot while running away.
For years, Denise Lajmudir has been researching the sprawling network of Native American boarding schools used by the U.S. government to assimilate Native children.
This is a photo of my grandfather and his sister at boarding school. Grandpa's 9 years old. I'm not sure how old. I want America to be aware of what happened to us. I call it America's best kept secret.
It was in 65, 66. The Bureau of Indian Affairs, they had a police force, and they were going around and they were rounding up some of these kids. And so they came to our house and they picked me up and they put me in the police car. I was 11 and going on 12 when that happened. They put us on a bus and we're going to this boarding school, Wapton Indian boarding school. I wrote down a couple of words when I tried to explain, try to describe my experience there. Abuse, neglect, bullying, torture, and pain.
The federal government's practice of sending Native American children to boarding schools dates back to the 1800s.
The boarding schools were part of this larger assimilation policy to de-Indianize the Indian and absorb people into the mainstream society. Children taking as young as 4 and 5 years old and forbidden to practice their religion or speak their language or wear traditional clothing. And it was very intentional that they re-educate them to try to extinguish the native culture.
The children, as we find them before we bring them to the government schools, we bring them in, clean them up. They are being rapidly brought from their state of comparative savagery and barbarism to one of civilization.
Between 1819 and 1969, the federal government, with help from religious groups, operated or supported over 400 schools across 37 states. Estimates show that more than 100,000 Native children were taken from their families and placed in the schools. Lajmudir's research has led her to archives across the country, and it's drawn her repeatedly back to the grounds of an old boarding school 100 miles from her home.
So we can go upstairs.
We walked in and all these strange people were standing there. People talking rough and mean and jerking us in line, and we didn't know from one day or another what was going to happen to us. We were all afraid of being there. When I asked my father why we were sent to boarding schools, my dad said they had no choice. We were really poor kids. And he said the superintendent had came to them and told them that we would all have to go away to school.
I have flashbacks getting to the school. I'm noticing that they're cutting everybody's hair off. There were kids crying. I remember young Native Americans. I think that they prided themselves in their long hair.
So these are the sinks, the troughs that the little boys would have come wash up in the morning. Oh, this is really in bad shape. My father was beaten severely. Mom was also locked in closets for not speaking English. Some more storage of the old desks. And they were told, you know, you filthy stinking Indians and you'll never amount to anything. And back here is the dungeon. So this is where boys were put when they didn't speak English.
At Boston, there was 18 rooms on each wing, and they were all numbered, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And there was an equipment room that didn't have a number on it. So we gave it that name, room 19. And there was a little metal grill on the door, about this big. And one day I noticed that there were some kids all standing around this grill. And you can hear this kid getting beaten in this room. One day I took some food out of the cafeteria, and I got into trouble for doing that, and I ended up in room 19. Your choice was the fiberglass fishing pole or the razor strap.
They would haul us out early in the morning before breakfast to go and work. We did hard labor, like little tiny miniature slaves, and whose brains were just now starting to function for 5, 6, 7 years. When I look back and I think about the things that had happened to us, there was never anyone monitoring them. There were some of us that were getting abused and couldn't go nowhere. We had nowhere to run. As a little kid, where do you run? We were taught so much hardship that they didn't teach us nothing except anger as we got older.
It was difficult for me. I was kind of a lost soul, you know, just stumbling around. It's hard to talk about it because it was something that I tried to block out of my mind.
My folks did not send me or my brother and sister to boarding school, but I still suffer from the effects of them having attended boarding school. My father was very verbally abusive. We were hit a lot. I always say, where did they learn to be parents?
A new reckoning over America's painful relationship with Native Americans. Well, now a federal investigation is going to look into this dark chapter of American history.
In 2022, the Department of the Interior, under Native leadership for the first time, announced the initial findings of its unprecedented investigation into the boarding school system.
We must shed light on the unspoken traumas of the past. Today, we take a critical step forward in that work.
According to the report, 19 federal Indian boarding schools accounted for over 500 child deaths.
The report is a damning reckoning of America's dark past.
The government kept everything hush-hush. They don't want to be told that things like this happen. I think it should come out and should be told.
The report is just the first step in what officials say will be part of a comprehensive process that aims to help bring accountability for a deeply consequential U.S. policy.
I'm getting close to the end of my career. Had quite a few jobs in education and made my way back to Dunseith here about 4 years ago. And I was thinking about these students that I went to school with when I went down to my office there, and their faces are forever young in my mind. And a lot of them are gone now, of course, When I think about that, I think about, what am I doing here? What is my responsibility? If I could have an impact on one child's life, especially a Native American one, then, I've accomplished my goal. Divulging these stories that I've kept in my vaults for 50 years I think is a way for me to heal. But those wounds are still there. They're still there, after 50 years. So time doesn't heal all.
So I think we'll just take a couple moments to let that sink in. I think it was a really good introduction to why we're here. And while we're just taking a moment of silence, I will have our panelists for the next conversation start to come up here. Have fun. All right, thanks everyone. There's quite a number of people on the stage now. So we will have them introduce themselves for sure. But quickly, I just want to summarize some of what we heard in that video. So the Truth and Healing Bill, the larger name, Truth and Healing Commission on Indian Boarding School Policies Act. The Truth and Healing Bill would establish the first formal commission to investigate federally funded Indian boarding schools. That's really important. We just heard from this video that, and Bridget also mentioned it, that the Department of Interior has been doing some work, but we'll understand a little more during this panel and the rest of the weekend why that's a good start, but needs more support, and why this commission is so necessary, even with an investigation already started. The commission would collect records and it would provide recommendations on how to move towards right relationships with Native tribes. So the bill itself does not necessarily give recommendations. It's just setting up the commission. And then the commission does that work to tell the federal government what steps they could take out of the info that they've gathered. The other thing to remember is that these schools did operate from the early 1800s through the 1960s. There were over 400 boarding schools in operation around the country, and many were ran by faith groups. And the fact that this bill is deeply significant for tribal nations as they live with, as you heard in the video, generational trauma from the Indian boarding school era. So this is something that, yes, happened in the past, but continues to have an impact in the present. And we'll talk more about that. So I am going to allow our panelists to introduce themselves. These are all members of the 2022 through 2023 Advocacy Corps cohort. So, oh, thank you. Yes. I'm sure that was maybe another Advocacy Corps member. Maybe it was Bridget. Thanks, Bridget. So the Advocacy Corps is a program that hires up to 20 young adults every year to work for 10 months on a particular issue. The issue changes every year. And these lovely people on stage were in a cohort that worked for 10 months on truth and healing advocacy. So they're going to give us a lot of good information. They have a lot of lessons learned, a lot of advice. And we think this is a great way to get us started, because as we're covering all of the traumatic policies that happen, we also want people to hold on to the idea that we can make a change with the work that we're doing. And these people up on the stage right now are a testament to the fact that our advocacy can make a change. And we really hope that you all will be even more convinced of that after hearing from them. So Rachel, if you want to start by introducing yourself, we'll go down the line and then I have questions.
Sure. Can everyone hear me? Okay, great. My name is Rachel Overstreet. I'm from the great state of South Dakota. I use she, her pronouns, and I am Choctaw Nation.
Hello, my name is Karime. I am originally from Mexico, but have lived my whole life in Phoenix, Arizona. That's where I am currently living. And my pronouns are she, her, ella.
Hi, everyone. My name is B. I'm from upstate New York, so not New York City, so sorry. And my pronouns are they, them.
Hi, y'all. Y'all look amazing. Okay, I see you stepped out. My name is Destini Perkins. I'm from San Diego, California. She, her pronouns, and I'm excited to be here with y'all today.
All right. My name is Taylor Trevino. I use she, her pronouns. I'm from Austin, Texas.
Thank you all. So the first question that I have for you all is about the fact that you really had to immerse yourself in this advocacy. You had to learn so much about the Truth and Healing Commission, about the Indian boarding school era. So what has left an impression on you about the history of the Indian boarding school era and its generational impact and legacy? And Karime, we'll start with you. What has left an impression on you about this history?
Yes, so like I mentioned, I am from Arizona, and we actually had the second largest amount of boarding schools in the United States. And I never knew this. I didn't know this before coming into the Advocacy Corps. My time in the Advocacy Corps was actually my very first time ever lobbying and organizing around issues in this way. And so after I really learned the history of my own state and its involvement in these schools, I knew that I had to be part of something to rectify some of the wrongs. And so some of the impacts that I see physically in my state is that we literally have streets named after these schools. I mean, we have Indian School Road, and if you drive on that road, it leads to where school used to be. We have monuments around our state surrounding the boarding schools. And so I see a lot of the physical impacts around my state. And so I knew that, if this is what has come from this era, like physically, I can only imagine what the emotional and mental impacts are for children and families. So yeah, that has been kind of what I've seen.
Thank you. And what about you, Rachel? What has left an impression on you about this history?
Yeah, that, for me, growing up in and around Native communities and, coming from that community myself, what I see as the legacy of boarding schools is a legacy of emotional and psychological terror, really. For the children and then who became adults who attended these boarding schools, the legacy is a legacy of pain. It's a legacy of suffering. And for many of the elders in our community, it is a legacy of being at war with yourself, being told that your skin color, your heritage, your hair, your spiritual practices are evil or devil worship or wrong. Not being allowed to speak your language, and then continuing on that legacy where you have, these people who they go on to have children themselves. Well, how are they supposed to be parents? Like the wonderful woman in the video said, they're just taught anger. How are they supposed to lead their communities? How are they supposed to be parents or grandparents? Because they've never been taught how to do that. They were deprived of that opportunity. So that is what I see as the legacy of Indian boarding schools that has to be addressed.
Just to round out this question, I'll go all the way over there to Destini. What impression has been left on you from all the research and advocacy you've done on this?
Yeah, so I grew up in California, and I would like to say, California's education is pretty thorough, but I had never heard about the Indian boarding school era. I'm sure some of you today too, right? You're like, wow, like this existed. How come this wasn't taught? And so learning about this, coming into the Advocacy Corps, it just opened up like my heart to be more empathetic and learning, okay, like this is such a tough and heavy topic, right? And I wanted to do the work. I wanted to learn more. And like when we hear about historical events, we always think that it happened so long ago, right? Oh, that was historical. Like we can't possibly be enduring traumatic effects right now. And when we're learning this and we're talking about this during our summer intensive, or we have a week and we're just like researching and accepting all this information, and one of the members in the Corps was just like, my grandma was in the Indian boarding school era, you know, young adult. And I'm like, wow, it really wasn't that far away, right? And so it just puts you in perspective of like, this is why the work is so important, because we are battling that on a daily, or people like Rachel, right? You're like learning all of these things and you're actually systemically and biologically being affected. And so that's why I wanted to get into this work, and also why the healing aspect of the Truth and Healing Commission is so important. So I look forward to talking about that later in this conversation.
Actually, you make me want to actually ask the audience, before planning for this event, so before even, you know, registering, can you raise your hand if you did receive some sort of education on Indian boarding schools? You learned about it in some way before planning to come here. Okay, that's a decent number of people. Okay, great. Okay.
That's great.
I have another question now about more specific now in the lobbying regard. This cohort, like I said, did spend 10 months lobbying on the issue, both the House and the Senate. You know, all parts of the political spectrum we were lobbying and working with, and legislators from all over the country. So it'll be important to hear what y'all heard in these offices, especially what you all took away as why this ask is so necessary and important. So Rachel, why don't you get us started? Why, or what takeaway would you want people here to have with why it's so important to advocate on this issue?
So, you know, as we heard about in the video, and that, you know, I'm sure a lot of you will learn more and more about over, you know, this next week, Congress authorized these schools. So Congress took it upon itself to pay the teachers who went there, to make it clear that the police officers who are rounding up Native children and forcing them to go to these schools were legally doing that. And also that this entire operation of assimilation was part of a broader US congressional strategy. So because Congress authorized this legacy of terror, Congress has to be the one to undo it. And that's why this specific ask, this piece of legislation is so important. You know, what Secretary Haaland is doing over at the Department of Interior is amazing work. I would encourage all of you to go take a look at the report that her office has put out. But it is not a congressional strategy. It's not congressional legislation. It's not a congressional set of policies that could help you know, our communities going forward. And it's not an apology. And it's not taking accountability. And so that's why this specific ask is so important, because it is the first step to taking accountability by the body that authorized these schools.
Thank you for being so specific about the relationship with what the DOI, Department of Interior, is doing right now, because you all might hear a little bit about that. It might come up when you're lobbying on Tuesday. Oh, what about this DOI thing that's happening? What does that have to do with the Truth and Healing Commission? So it's helpful to start hearing more about, you know, what to say when someone does bring up the DOI investigation. And thank you for just really highlighting that congressional action is what's needed here. And that also is not as dependent on what administration is in control at that time either, right? So the Department of Interior being so attached to an administration, if that administration changes, other things change, right? So having this really more permanent congressional act actually passed is important for that reason among others. So just wanted to really emphasize that. So thank you. And I'll go back to Karime now. What about you? What is one takeaway that you would share about why this act is so important?
Yes, so for me, something that really stood out is that the federal government has treaty responsibility to tribal nations. And this means that the United States has a responsibility to, like, they have a moral responsibility to protect tribal sovereignty, rights, assets, etc. And so for me, going into these lobby visits, knowing this was super empowering because I knew no matter who was on the other side of that table, they have this responsibility. And that also allowed me to realize that this issue is nonpartisan. It doesn't matter, what side you are on the political spectrum. This issue is your responsibility to care about as a federal employee. And so going into these spaces, leading with that confidence was really powerful for me. And it's not very common that you go into a lobby visit where you're dealing with an issue that is nonpartisan. Usually it's partisan work, or hey, because they lean this way, they might not care about this issue. But the simple fact that they are United States government officials means that they have this responsibility to uphold tribal rights.
Thank you. That's another great point. Lots of great points have been made and will continue to be made. Taylor, we're going to go to you now. What is one takeaway that you would share about why this is important?
Yeah, to piggyback off of what Rachel was saying, in terms of actions that Congress can take on this is really just like the first step. In my personal opinion, it's kind of the bare minimum, right? So nothing too extreme. We're just asking them to create this commission that will then do the investigations, create these recommendations for Congress to deal with in the future and years ahead. But this, we're not asking them to spend billions of dollars on something. We're not asking them to take some like extreme stance. Like Karime was saying too, it's a nonpartisan issue, and this bill has bipartisan support. So it really is just past time for Congress to take accountability and start trying to right the wrongs.
Thank you. Okay, so next we want to talk about the fact that, advocacy can be challenging. Obviously, we're saying here that regardless of where this person is in their political identity, they are a federal employee, whoever you're talking to at your lobby visits, whether it's the legislator themselves or a staffer. But even so, you could still experience, a legislator maybe not knowing enough about the bill or maybe not agreeing for some reason. So I do want to talk about pushbacks that you have heard in offices or that you have experienced in your work, and sharing how you addressed it. So, the people in the audience can hopefully, take that with them when they lobby. So let's start with B. B, what would you say is a pushback that you experienced when you were doing your lobbying and advocacy work?
Yeah, so for me, I did not receive as much pushback as I did hesitancy. One of my senators was very open to talking with us, to meeting with us regularly and consistently, but never co-sponsored throughout the whole program. But I think something that was super important for my time in the cohort was definitely being resilient and being consistent, right? So I had made sure that I had meetings scheduled every month with the staffer. The staffer knows, like, hey, B is emailing us again. We should probably answer. And that it really helped. Also, like, one of the main parts of Advocacy Corps is like, the word is leaving me, cultivating a relationship with the staffers and with the office itself. That was one of my favorite parts. I actually still get coffee with some of the staffers that I met during my time. So yeah, I guess I would just say consistency, super important.
And it's good to hear also that even if, it took a bit for them to like understand the bill, and it sounds like they did not co-sponsor during the time that you were working with that office, that you still had a good relationship with them. I said earlier, we really believe in the power of relationship building, even when it comes to our lobbying, which maybe you wouldn't associate with lobbying, but I just think what you said, B, is a really good example of that, because that means that on another topic, on another thing that you really care about, they'll answer your call, they'll answer your email. So I love hearing that. Karime, what about you? What is one pushback that you heard while you were doing this work?
Yes, so for me, I did encounter something, and that was an issue with the subpoena power of this bill. And so what this means is that the commission would have authority to subpoena other groups and basically ask for their testimony, their documents, etc. And for me, my specific representative had an issue with this because of their connection with faith communities. And so the way that I was able to navigate this is letting them know that faith communities have already come forward, not only to show their support of this bill in general, but specifically of the subpoena power. And this is such a key element of the bill, because there was even asked, is there any wiggle room to remove this as part of the bill? And the answer is no. I personally believe that this is very important because they hold documents that are so important. They hold answers, and keeping these can really hinder the investigation. It can lead them astray. And so just explaining that and being very open and honest was how I navigated it. Again, and reassuring them, this is not really too much of an issue for the faith communities, as they've already shown their support. So that was something that I did encounter.
And it's a good thing that Karime mentioned subpoena power. That is incredibly important that it stays in the bill. If anyone hears pushback on there should not be this subpoena power attached to the commission, we push back against that. We absolutely need the commission to be able to legally require groups to hand over their records. That's part of what's missing here. There are people that have gone missing in these schools that without records, without names that are handed over, the investigation is not a complete one. So without the subpoena power in this commission, the bill really does lose a lot of its impact, and that's very important. And I'm glad you raised that. Faith groups really are supportive of this bill, and from the faith groups we've worked with and the Native organizations that have also worked with other faith groups, we have not heard of a single faith group that says, no, we will not be giving over a document. We will be unhappy that we have to hand these documents over. Faith groups are supportive of this bill and are supportive of that subpoena power. We need those documents and we need those records. So just really emphasizing that one too. And we'll go now to Taylor. What pushback did you experience that you want to share?
Yeah, so as an advocate in Texas, I can talk to y'all about pushback all day. So feel free to find me after this if you have any questions. Love Texas. But one thing is that, so legislators, no matter what, are always going to want to support legislation that impacts their constituents. But in Texas, we didn't have any federal Indian boarding schools. We only have 3 federally recognized tribes and reservations, so generally a lower population than, say, Arizona. So something that I got was, well, how does this impact Texans? How does it impact my constituents? It didn't, like, that doesn't affect us. But that's not true. People move, especially when you consider, I like how you, Rachel said earlier, something about like federal or congressional strategy when it comes to policies. It didn't start with boarding schools. It didn't end. There were federal policies less than 100 years ago that highly encouraged Native American people to move from their reservations to cities across the United States. So Dallas is one of those cities. We have a larger Native American population there for reasons like that. And so point is, like, there are lots of descendants of survivors, probably survivors themselves living in Texas that would be affected by this bill. And I guarantee no matter what state you're in, this is something that would benefit your communities as well.
Thank you. And we'll end this question with Destini. What about you? What pushback did you encounter?
Yeah, well, I liked how you touched on relationship building with the staffers and legislators, because I'm a strong believer that connection comes first and task comes second. If you build a relationship with someone, they feel seen, they feel heard and respected, more than likely you're going to achieve the goal that you want. So my story was, I get to the program and I'm doing my research. Okay, are my senators and is my representative supportive of this bill? They already co-signed the bill. So I'm like, oh, amazing. I go to Larissa. I'm like, so I'm done. She's like, oh no, honey, there's more to do. I was like, okay. So then we have this conversation and we're like, what strategies can we assign or request to my representative and senator's office? One of them being, hey, can you encourage your coworkers, AKA fellow legislators, to push on this bill? Can you co-sign this bill? Have these conversations when you're in meetings and when you're in DC. Another strategy I requested was, can you post on social media? Indigenous Peoples Day, or just bringing on this topic, right, that this bill needs to get passed. And having those conversations with the staffer, we'd already been meeting every other month. And you might still be thinking, well, still, what's the point of spending all that time? But there was a lot of students that had never lobbied, some in high school, some in college, and they didn't even know that you could get on a Zoom call with your representative and senator, right? Because that's not something you grow up in school and them saying, hey, push back, resist, fight the power, right? This is not a Public Enemy song. This is real life. They don't teach us. You got that joke, didn't you? They didn't teach us that. And so now as we're developing and growing, we're understanding, okay, yeah, we do have a power, a voice does matter. And so these conversations that you do have on Tuesday, just remember, it's gonna feel uncomfortable because we're not used to doing it. But all those meetings that I did went great. And just like you get coffee with the staffers, I've seen staffers at different events and they're like, oh my gosh, how are you doing? It's just cool. It's such a good relationship, whether they co-sponsor or not, right? It's just building that relationship and having them be aware that this even exists. Because I'm sure we had to educate a lot of ours too. Yeah. They didn't know about it and they're running our country, right? So it's a mutual way. It's a mutual thing.
Yeah, thanks for reminding everyone that until this bill has been passed, a legislator can always do more to support the bill. If they've already co-sponsored, that's not the end of the story for them. They can do way more. And thank you, Destini, for giving examples of what someone can do even after co-sponsoring a bill in support. So we'll move on now to some advice. I know we've been giving some advice throughout the other questions, but we'll start with B. What is some advice that you have to other young people, such as all of us in this room, as they do their lobbying on this topic?
Yeah, I think one thing that I really like that actually Giselle, who y'all met earlier, if you didn't already know her, really reminds me of all the time is that our legislators need to listen to us. It's literally their job. So that was always really affirming to remember, and even to tell the people that I was bringing on my visits with me, they are on our time because they are in fact employees. So yeah, I think too, similarly, just to piggyback off of what Destini was saying, my district rep co-sponsored before the end of summer intensive. I think I went to meet with the office and they were like, oh yeah, we actually heard about that. It's on the desk today. And I was like, oh, okay, cool. That's really great. So can you talk to the other people in our state? And they were like, yeah, sure, of course. So yeah, I don't know, just to pinpoint that, but they do have to listen to you. They have to at least sit down and give you the common decency to hear the words coming out of your mouth.
Yeah, we belong in those rooms and we belong in the policymaking process. Yes. And we remind them of that by doing this type of thing. So thanks, B. And now, Rachel, what advice do you have?
My advice, so when I started lobbying on Truth in Healing, I'd never lobbied before, and it was my first ever spring lobby weekend in 2022. And I kind of knew okay, so we're lobbying on a bill and I care about the issue, but what is a bill and how does that keep going. And I was like, I feel like, I saw the Schoolhouse Rock video, and that's about like the knowledge base that I'm kind of working with for how federal legislation happens. So suffice it to say, I was not a subject matter expert when I walked into that first ever lobby visit. What I did have, though, was a deep care and a deep emotional investment in the topic of truth and healing, in the topic of boarding schools. My community and my family were impacted by these policies. And so it didn't matter that I didn't really know how the bill worked so much. I didn't really understand all of the minute, tiny little details. I didn't know all the phrases that, committee jurisdiction, markup session. I was like, I have no idea what that is. But that doesn't matter because I am a constituent. I am a person who elected or didn't vote for my representatives and senators. And so they have to listen to me. And I have a story. I have a community behind me. I have a deep emotional connection to the issue. And that's what matters. That is where your power really is. Because the staffer, maybe they have 100 issues that they're technically overseeing, but what you can give them is a face to that issue. You can give them an emotional connection to it. So don't worry that you're not a professional lobbyist. You're not supposed to be. Those are the weird people. You're cool people.
Okay, let's move on to who is next on my list. Karime, what advice do you have?
My advice is be yourself, lean into the power of your story, and lean into the power of your voice. As many of my colleagues have already mentioned, it's really easy to fall into limiting beliefs. I was a victim of it myself. Do I belong in this space? Am I qualified enough to be in this room? Do I know enough about this issue? And 9 times out of 10, I would psych myself out knowing fully that I do care about this issue and that I can speak on it because of how it impacts the people around me. So definitely don't be discouraged, don't be scared. Federal policy takes a while to make movement, but the important thing is to continue the conversations. This could be your first conversation ever about it, but it's not going to be your last. If you don't know something, it's totally okay. And I did it myself in my own lobby visits to say, hey, I don't know the answer to this question at this moment, but I will follow up with you in an email and answer your question right away. And I did. So definitely, stand with confidence or sit with confidence, and everything will be okay. You will be totally fine.
And finally on this question, Destini, what advice do you have?
Yeah, so kind of what Rachel was saying about not knowing terms, that was me too, girl. I was learning all these terms as we go. Honestly, being part of the program, I learned more about how the policy system works than my AP government class. Still, shout out to my teacher, you did great. But nothing beats hands-on experience, right? And literally talking to them face to face on a monthly basis. But another thing too, we're not supposed to be experts in this. We're just learning this right now. So don't feel, I don't know enough information. Do I even know what I'm saying? That's why there's so many moving pieces over the weekend you'll see on who says what, who brings up which thing. You're not doing it by yourself. And on top of that, you get a leave behind. You get a paper that kind of has some bullet points on what you're going to talk about. So you don't have to freak out. You can always look at it. The senator or rep or staffer is going to get the paper too. So everyone will be on the same page. But, one thing I want to bring up, is there any Gen Z in here? Okay. I felt like I was waiting for more excitement, but you know what? It's two. It's a weekend.
There was more, but okay.
But okay. I'm Gen Z, and I feel like our generation is the generation of accountability. We hold people accountable. And in a not professional way, we don't play games, right? We will call you out for what you're doing because if things need to change or things can be better, we are going to speak up about it. So this weekend, that's what I think we're going to be focusing on is accountability. Can Congress take accountability for what happened during the Indian boarding school era? And how can we use our voice and our passion to do that as well? I mean, historically speaking, youth, AKA young adults, have always been at the forefront of many social movements because of their energy and their passion and their fire. So when we use that to Congress, right, who they've been sitting there for a while, you know, you see some of them balding, right? You know, it's just like, how do I tell them things are changing, the times are changing, this is what this weekend is for, gain that experience, and if you want to get into this work, I mean, I'm just going to shout out the Advocacy Corps, because honestly, it's like perfect if you're wanting to get into government. But yeah, this weekend is gonna be great for you all. So don't put too much stress on yourself. Tag team anybody in your group because it's a collective thing.
All right, and just to end, we will allow for some questions. So start thinking if you have them. We just said we're not necessarily the policy experts. Obviously, we know a lot from our own experiences, but it would be great to hear questions about their experience, about what they heard in lobby visits, those really specific policy conversations, those really specific policy questions. Not only is there a resource that I'll explain at the end that's in your program that you can be looking at a lot more information, but there will be other experts on stage and there will be office hour times and things like that to ask those types of questions. So think now if you have questions for the group, but our last question, we'll just go down the line, honestly. Starting with Rachel, part of this work is about healing. Obviously, we've been saying Truth and Healing Commission, and the bill speaks to this purpose. So through your advocacy, what have you witnessed and learned about truth, justice, and healing work to address the terrorizing acts and cultural genocide implemented by the US's Indian boarding school policies? What did you witness and learn about healing?
You know, for me, coming as a young woman, someone from a quote-unquote flyover state, and as a Native person to DC, my impression, or I guess my stereotype maybe, or not really true thing, was that change can't happen. Like, you know, growing up in my community and my family, it's like no one has cared about us for hundreds of years. No one has done anything to help us. And I can see the impact in my state and in my family of what it looks like when the federal government neglects your community for so long, when it breaks the promises that it made. And I just didn't believe that there could be change. And that's not true. You know, that was something that I told myself. That was something that had been told to me, honestly, by our culture and like the way that we think about change in DC. Change can't happen. It's out there. It takes hundreds of people over years to make it happen. It takes even more than the people in this room, the many, many Native and non-Native advocates who've been working on this issue for years or even decades. Their voices, they all build up together into a shout. And that is heard on the federal level, and change can happen. And I'm so excited to be a part of it with all of you.
For me, change requires people power. And without the work of every single one of us in this room, we won't see that change. I really, really learned about what it is to be an ally. I come from a background of really fighting for immigrant justice. And so that was kind of, you know, the issue, or is really the issue that I have a strong passion for. So through my time in the Advocacy Corps, I learned how it was to be an advocate who is not like personally impacted by the issue. Because I am personally impacted by immigrant justice. And so it was very easy for me to share my story or to talk about my community because I have lived experience. However, when it came to this issue, I couldn't really share in that perspective because I am not a personally impacted person. So I really, really learned that to be an advocate, I can elevate others' voices. I can elevate other people's stories. One of the most cherished part about this program for me was being able to sit with tribal leaders in my state and talk to them about what this means to them, and then bring these stories to Congress. And also, like, I just felt really, really lucky and humbled to be able to hold these stories. So yeah, just if you're not personally impacted, you can be an ally. We need allies, and change requires all of us. Also, just quickly, I will be around, as will my colleagues, throughout the weekend. So if you guys have any questions, like, or you want to come up to me, definitely feel free. I just wanted to shout that out.
Thanks, Karime. B, what about you? What did you learn and witness about healing?
Yeah, for sure. So it was the cohort. The program itself was a really good reminder of how uncomfortable healing can be. I think anytime you're addressing an injury, a wound, it's painful to deal with. It's uncomfortable. The healing process itself is extremely uncomfortable. So I think that sometimes you just have to kind of lean into the discomfort. It's going to feel really awkward. I promise we will see you on the other side. It does work out in our favor. I would also just say, like, just to kind of reiterate what everyone else is saying, like, it takes multitudes, right? So I was really lucky to be able to have like 20 of my family members on one of my lobby visits, which was really cool. And yeah, it was a learning curve for everyone involved. A lot of my family had no idea about the issue. And the staffers, though it was the end of the program, some of them still needed like some reminders about what it was. So it was kind of super uncomfortable, but necessary. And there is progress on the other side.
So if you're a visual learner or an analogy learner like me, maybe this kind of can put it in perspective. So have you guys seen the Ant movie or remember it from when you were little?
There's so many.
The first one.
Okay.
So there's a scene that TikTok recently refreshed my memory happened where the grasshoppers were kind of the leaders over the ants, right? And this one ant had said something and they're like, it's just one ant. Like, what's he gonna do about it, you know? And the grasshopper was like, no, like if that one ant talks to that one ant and they come together, like it's over. Like we can't control anymore. We can't oppress them anymore. And so I think about that with healing. When I think of healing, I think of spaces and coming together, whether it's like quiet spaces or whether it's like empowering spaces, like protesting or just empowering. You're going to be in a lot of different groups and spaces this weekend. So remembering that it starts in those spaces too, but it also starts with yourself. Like you're gonna have a lot of reflection time this weekend. So if you're feeling like, wow, this is a lot of heavy information from seeing a video to speaking with people directly affected by this issue, like just take a moment for yourself and understand like you are just a human being and you're here and you're trying your best, and just do what you can to be the best ally possible.
All right. So yeah, takeaways for when it think about truth and healing and justice with this issue. Something that I realized is that all of those things really take place in so many different aspects of our society. And once you really get into it, you start to look at it at a bigger picture. And so I kind of realized how much how much progress we still have left to go in so many different spaces, whether it's legislatively, so this bill, or state and local policy, things like education, making sure that students are being taught the true history, because if things were as they should be, everyone's hands should have gone up earlier, right? Making sure we're not just having that one like European colonizer perspective. When it comes to representation and like diversity, equity, inclusion, whether it's in the workplace, on college campuses, representation in media, TV, things like that, or also just things in our healthcare system where things are not equitable based on like various different racial, ethnic lines. Like there's just so much progress to be done, and this bill is a great first step, but I hope you guys are kind of able to take away what justice for Native American and Indigenous communities looks like in so many other different avenues as well.
Thank you all. So let's just give our panel a quick round of applause.
For Nancy Pelosi.
Thanks. are there questions for our panelists? And I will just point. Okay, there's someone right here in the middle. Thank you, Linnea.
This was actually, let me just take this off.
And if you can give your name and where you're from, and then just give your question.
I'm Caleb Stewart. I'm from Iowa. But this is a question for Rachel, actually. So you said you're from South Dakota. I'm a former South Dakotan myself. Did you meet with Dusty Johnson at all? Did you meet with any senators or representatives from South Dakota at all?
So, good question. I will say, like 99% of the time, you're meeting with their staff.
Gotcha.
So this is for everyone, just like heads up. Very not likely that the senator or representative or whatever will walk in the room and be like, hey, it's probably not going to happen. It's probably going to be their like 25-year-old, overworked, like coffee riddled staffer who's like, what are we doing? What are we doing? So yeah, I will say that's like most of the time the people we were meeting with, but that doesn't mean that that's not important. Those people, I'm going to be honest, they really hold the levers of power. So yeah, that's what I'll say.
It was a two-part question. So what conversations you have had with them, has there been any like general sentiment towards this? I know the political makeup of South Dakota, and it's very similar to Iowa. So I'm just curious if there are some general ideas or pushback.
So I can speak generally.
I was going to say general, and then you two should also connect, like I think,
Yeah.
to give more specifics. That would be good. Yeah.
Yes. So generally, I'll just say for anyone who's coming from a state where maybe you have like a more conservative delegation, or like Taylor was saying, a delegation from a state that there is not a large tribal presence. A lot of times they just might not know, they might not be, your state might not have a dedicated staffer on tribal issues, which is very common. And then, sort of beyond that, I think just being cognizant that like, we'll talk about this a little later actually too, but like just because someone is, conservative or Republican does not mean that they are not interested or care about this issue, right? So this is truly bipartisan legislation. If you look online, congress.gov, you can see the co-sponsors of the legislation all over the political spectrum, right? And that is really best case scenario when you're advocating on something. So don't, go in with like a mindset like, oh my goodness, how do I say something like, I don't know if they'll agree with me. Like, that is for this particular legislation, that is probably not even like a cross your mind kind of thing. They're all open to hearing about it.
Thank you. Okay, there's a question up here in the front. And then I'll look over here for the next one. Sorry, y'all.
Oh, right here. No, right here in the front.
Hi, my name is Osewa, and I'm from here in the DC area. And I had a question kind of relating to how congressmen are kind of wary about supporting the bill, and mostly due to their constituents who might have had a role in the injustice. And I was wondering if the bill offered, any amnesty maybe for people and organizations that have been a part of the injustice, and how you all felt about that, whether that should be included or not.
So I think that might be more of a policy question for our office hours or other speakers. But I will say, Rachel, correct me if I'm wrong, there is nothing like that in the bill.
Yeah, so the bill doesn't, the bill just creates a commission that can investigate what happened. There's no consequences for like, Quakers ran boarding schools. Quakers are not going to go to jail or get fined or, it just is to investigate and like say, hey, Quakers, you might have some documents or something related to a boarding school. Can we have them? Can we look at them?
Yeah. Thank you. So short answer is no, there's not something like that in the bill. But if there's more detailed questions about that, definitely write them down. Yeah. Thank you for that.
Thank you.
Are there any questions over here? I can't quite see.
Some on this side.
Oh, okay. Okay. Someone in the back over there. Someone by the photographer.
Oh boy. Sorry.
That's a lot of work. I love it. Hi, everyone. So my name is Terry Zayu. I'm from Louisiana, current AC member, actually. And I'm also both Black and African woman. And so as y'all were talking, one of the things that stood out to me is, even though it's not exactly the same, I see a lot of through lines between conversation about reparations for slavery and this commission. And one of the things that I always hear people talk about, just generally, there's posts online about it, is not only do people think it was so long ago, but they also don't see the through line and the connection between how these people are impacted today. So if y'all wouldn't mind just like elaborating and giving us an overview on, what are the modern day impacts for Indigenous communities in terms of all the harmful legislations and things that the schools did, even though, like people said, it was a long time ago, we know that these impacts are still here. So I just kind of wanted y'all to go over that a little bit more.
Can I make a quick comment?
Yeah, go ahead,
someone gives
Destini.
examples?
Yeah.
So I remember talking about this because there was a lot of students of color, just core members of color during our cohort. And one thing that I learned, because like you, right, I also identify as a Black woman, we can't compare traumas, right? Although like as Black people, like we have systems of oppression, I wouldn't compare that to like what, your family has gone through, Rachel. You can't, right? Although you want to as a minority, I think it's best not to. I don't know if y'all would agree with me, is to keep them separate, because I don't know like what your family went through. I can only speak to my experience, but as an ally, right, as a minority Black woman saying, I have felt systems of oppression affect my life, right, biologically, physically, mentally, and I feel that, right? So I want to support you to where we can minimize that. But I think just having those conversations, just to be careful how we word it, because we don't want to equate something that may have totally different levels of impact, if that makes sense. But I want to give someone else an opportunity.
No,
to give
I
examples.
appreciate that nuance, especially as some of us are working as allies. So thank you. Does anyone else want to comment on the question or answer the question? Yeah, Karime?
Yeah, just kind of reflecting back on some of the conversations that I had with tribal leaders in my state. This was actually a question that I had for them as well. Because yeah, we say it all the time, like the impacts, but I was really curious, what are those impacts? What does that look like to people today? And some of the examples that I was given were, well, a lot of people don't speak their native languages anymore because they were abused and literally had the language stripped from them, forced to speak English. And so there's now a fear of speaking their language because they, the impact was that they weren't taught that anymore. Maybe your grandparent knew your native language and was so traumatized that they didn't continue on and teach that to your parents, and then your parents never taught that to you. So I know loss of language was one, and another one was just like their identity. And actually, Destini and I were talking about this a little bit, like on a personal level, of even to what you wear. They were literally stripped of their tribal clothing and forced to wear different clothing. And that is such a part of who you are, how you dress, how you express yourself. Even that was stripped from them. And so for me, those are two things that I remember were impacts today.
All right, thank you. Anyone want to add anything else?
I'll just say there are tons of resources on the lobby resources page of the website, including some written by yours truly.
Good for you, Rachel. Yeah, yes, we benefited so much from Rachel's expertise, working with us more closely in the planning, not just being on this panel. So thank you, Rachel. And I will actually point out where some of those resources are at the end. Let's take one more question. Okay, I see someone pointing to someone in the back. There's a red hat.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. Rojo Hidey from Texas. One of the conversations, thank you, team. One of the conversations that we had that was very difficult is acknowledging the truth. And I wanted to point out what you mentioned, Larissa, with truth-telling. We noticed that meeting some of these Congress people, when we said things like, well, America was built on stolen land with stolen labor, often they would stand away from that And in fact, it was until we started bringing up things like the genocidal beginnings of this nation. I believe that word carries a lot of weight, and it means different things for different people. And in fact, they would even push back on us to tell us that this country was not founded on a genocide. So I guess, how do y'all address these hard conversations with members of Congress or even staffers that push away and shy away from the truth? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. Does anyone want to start with that? Experiences from your own visits? Yeah, Taylor?
Yeah, I can say that, and this part can kind of, I don't know, can be kind of rough personally, but like your word choice is really important. So 100,000% agree with you. I wouldn't say that to a conservative office, right? Or just, I wouldn't say, this was built on stolen land with stolen labor, but you do, use the tough words like, this was a genocide committed, by Congress against Native Americans. There were human rights violations, all kinds of abuses, like that type of non-negotiable fact, you have to just put out there. And they may not take super quickly to it, but that's part of the education that goes into these meetings, and just kind of teaching them, and I guess maybe having a little bit of grace, but also still holding them accountable and not letting them shy away from the truth.
Can I just add on to that? I would say, I didn't have that experience in my state, but I will say that as far as speaking to staffers and representatives, you can only be accountable for your word, right? So you, like Taylor said, you can say the truth, and you should say the truth. I'm personally not going to police anybody's language and tell you how to say what to say, because I'm going to be honest, that's not my spot. But the tone that you use when you're talking to staffers matters. And yeah, I don't know, you can really only be accountable for what's coming out of your mouth. So as disheartening as that can be sometimes, don't stop speaking your truth because they don't want to hear it, is what I would say.
Thank you, B. I think that was really important, and actually reminds me that once we're back from the break, we're going to dive even deeper into what it means to engage with someone that's not agreeing with you. So obviously we can only speak about our own experiences, but there is a workshop from the stage in like half an hour where we will give way more like steps even into how you can do something like that. Does anyone want to add anything else to that question before we wrap up?
I would just say really quickly, because I hear a lot of shuffling.
We're almost done. Just one.
Let's
let Karime have the last word here.
No, just really quickly, because I really connect with that a lot. Living in Arizona and being an immigrant myself, I'm very much, the border crossed me. I didn't cross it. And this was really hard for me, as well, like choosing my words when meeting with congressional staff. But what I found was really helpful was to describe and then make my own conclusion. For example, I would say, according to the report from the Department of Interior, this, and this happened. And to me, that is genocide. I categorize this as a genocide because although, they may or may not agree, for me, that is what it is. And so, yeah. It kind of helped navigate some of those conversations where I wanted to say things so badly, but kind of had to measure my tone.
All right, thanks everyone. I want to wrap us up by saying that, to Karime's point a little bit ago, they will be here throughout the event. And I guess Karime personally volunteered herself to answer other questions if you want to find her later. Okay, Rachel too?
Yeah.
Okay, so people are agreeing. Yes, great. So please, approach, there's a lot of expertise on the stage when it comes to like how to handle advocacy around this topic, how to handle dynamics that come up in an office. So I think a lot more stories could have been told on the stage, and I'm sure you can hear a lot more if you do approach any of them during the event. So